My best friend asked me to help deliver compromising material. Late one night, I got a call from my best friend. He told me that he had uncovered an illegal scheme involving powerful people and asked me to help pass on the compromising material. I agreed, not realizing the danger we would be in. We met at his home, where he handed me a bag of important documents. However, our meeting was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of strangers threatening our lives. I had to flee, and my friend, fighting desperately, sacrificed himself to allow me to leave. I am now left alone with no idea what happened to him. The documents had been turned over to the FBI, and the investigation that had been launched had proved him right. But he himself has disappeared, and no one knows if he's still alive. I am haunted by memories of our past and that fateful night. The silence of the night was broken by a sharp phone call. I picked up the phone, not knowing who could have called so late. A familiar voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Andy?" "It's me, Vic," he said hoarsely, as if trying to hold back tears. I knew right away that something serious had happened. Vic had been my best friend since high school, but we hadn't spoken much in recent years. He always seemed to me a man who kept everything under control, so such a tone alerted me. "What's wrong?" I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Vic paused, then answered, "Help me, Andy. I need your help." His voice trembled with tension. "Of course I will. What happened?" I insisted, realizing it was serious. "Come to my place. I'll explain." And then the connection was cut off. The phone went silent, leaving me completely bewildered. But I knew one thing: my friend was in trouble, and he urgently needed my support. I quickly got ready and got into the car. The drive to Vic's house took about half an hour. The night was dark, moonless, and the city seemed empty and ominous. I tried to imagine what could have happened, but my thoughts were confused, and each option seemed even worse than the previous one. When I pulled up to Vic's house, I saw that the lights were on in only one room on the second floor. The rest of the building was plunged into darkness. When I got closer, I noticed that the door was ajar. It was strange, because Vic was always careful and cautious. I got out of the car and headed toward the driveway. It was quiet inside, with only a muffled rustling somewhere upstairs. My heart pounded harder as I climbed the stairs. On the second floor landing, I stopped in front of Vic's apartment door. It too was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open and stepped inside. The hallway was dark, but ahead of me I could see the light from the room where the sounds were coming from. As I moved forward, I felt the air become heavy and full of something unpleasant. The smell of burning and something else hit my nose. Metallic. Suddenly the lights went out and the room went completely dark. I froze in place, trying not to breathe. In the darkness, I heard the floor creak softly, as if someone was approaching. I tensed, preparing myself for what would happen next. Suddenly the lights came back on, and I saw Vic. He was standing by the window, holding a cell phone in his hands. His face was pale, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. Next to him was a bag filled with some papers and documents. "Andy, you're here," he said, smiling faintly. "Yes, of course. What's going on? Why did you call?" I asked, coming closer. Vic looked away and looked out the window. There was nothing visible outside the window but the black sky and the sparse lights of distant buildings. It all started a week ago. He began, taking a deep breath. "I was called into work and told that I had to audit an important contract. I thought it was routine, but it turned out to involve big money and powerful people." He was silent for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he continued. "When I started digging deeper, I discovered that I had forged documents to cover up the fraud. I tried to inform my superiors, but they just ignored my words. Then I decided to go to the police, but his voice shook and he fell silent. I waited for him to continue, feeling the tension building inside me. "But what?" I finally asked. Vic looked at me, and pain flashed in his eyes. "They came here last night. said they knew my intentions and warned me to keep quiet. Otherwise, he didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. Then why did you call me? I asked, still not realizing what role I was playing in this story. Vic looked at me and said, because you're the only person I can trust. I want you to take these documents and turn them over to the police. If anything happens to me, you can prove me right. He held out the bag to me. I took it and felt how heavy it was. Inside it were really important papers that could change a lot of things. I stood holding the bag and felt the world around me start to crumble. Everything that was happening seemed unreal, but I knew it was true. Vic had risked his life for justice, and now that responsibility fell on my shoulders. I understand, I said, nodding. I'll do what I can. Vic sighed in relief and looked out the window again. At that moment, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned and saw two men in suits standing in the doorway. Their faces were stern and their gazes cold. You know too much, Mr. Smith, one of them said, slowly approaching us. We can't let you go on. My heart raced. I realized they were coming for us. Vic grabbed my hand and whispered, "Run, Indy. Get the papers and run." I wanted to object, but at the same moment Vic pushed me aside and lunged at one of the men. A fight broke out, and I used that moment to run out of the room. My bag of papers was in my hands, and I ran down the stairs without looking back. I burst out of Vic's house and found myself on the street, clutching the heavy bag of papers in my hand. The sound of my car's engine echoed through the night city as I turned the wheel and sped away. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw two men in suits run out of the driveway and follow me. One of them pulled out a cell phone and started talking rapidly, probably calling for backup. The sounds of sirens came a few minutes later. I realized that time was short. The police were on their way. My hands were sweating, and my feet were instinctively pressing on the gas pedal, trying to put more distance between me and the pursuing cars. The traffic light at the intersection turned red, but I wasn't going to stop. As I sped through the red light, I heard squealing brakes and indignant honking from other drivers. The street became narrow, and I turned onto a side road, hoping to confuse my tracks. From behind, on the horizon, came the bright blue flashes of police cars. My car flew down the deserted streets until I reached an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Pulling over, I hid the car behind an old container and climbed out, hoping no one would notice. Grabbing my bag, I ran through the warehouse, passing rusty metal structures and old boxes. It was dark and damp in here, but I kept moving forward, following the plan that had suddenly emerged in my head. I knew I had to get to the old railroad bridge leading across the river. There, it might be possible to confuse the pursuers. When I reached the exit of the warehouse, I noticed a police car parked nearby. Two officers were standing nearby, surveying the area. I lurked in the shadows, waiting for them to leave. Finally, they got back in the car and drove off, apparently deciding that no one was here. As I crossed the railroad tracks, I could hear the rumble of a train approaching from afar. There wasn't much time left. I quickened my step, climbing the bridge. The iron vibrated under my feet, and the wind blew in my face, making my hair flutter. The river flowed beneath the bridge, black and silent. The train appeared from around the bend, and I felt my heart sink. At the last moment, I jumped off the bridge onto a small island in the middle of the river, taking cover behind a thick thicket of bushes. The train rumbled overhead, shutting out the noise of the chase. When it had passed, I got up and looked around. The policemen were nowhere to be seen. After crossing the river, I found myself on the opposite bank and headed for the nearest residential neighborhood. There I found a public transportation stop and got lost among the passengers. I took the first bus I could find and went to the center of town, then took another bus, got off a block away from my house, and walked the rest of the distance. Finally, when I reached home, I quickly stashed my bag of documents in a safe place. The night passed restlessly. I couldn't sleep thinking about what had happened. In the morning, I got up early and decided to act. I had to hand over the documents to the FBI, but how could I do it safely? I thought of an old acquaintance who worked for the police. We didn't talk to each other often, but he was always an honest guy. I dialed his number and explained the situation. He promised to help and set up a meeting in the city center near a park. I arrived at the meeting place before the appointed time. The park was nearly empty, with only a few joggers jogging past. My acquaintance, Officer Johnson, approached me a few minutes later. "Andy, good to see you. What's on your mind?" he asked, looking at me carefully. I told him the whole story from Vic's call to how I got the paperwork. Johnson listened attentively, not interrupting. "This is serious, Andy. These documents could uncover a major corruption scheme. Let's turn them over to the FBI agents. I know someone I can trust." We met with an FBI agent who carefully reviewed the documents and assured us that he would begin an investigation immediately. Days, weeks, months passed. The investigation began. It turned out that Vic was right. Behind this contract were very powerful individuals who were trying to hide their criminal acts. Justice prevailed, thanks to Vic's bravery and my efforts. But Vic himself, he vanished into thin air. No one has any idea what happened to him after that terrible night. Perhaps he is hiding somewhere far away, hoping to escape the pursuit of those he exposed. Or perhaps he is no longer alive and has fallen victim to the brutal forces he stood up to. The thought is unbearable to me, but I cannot rule out this possibility. Often I catch myself thinking about him. I remember our school years when we shared all our joys and sorrows, supported each other in difficult moments. Now that he's gone, I feel the loss most keenly. That fateful night will forever remain in my memory, a reminder of what a strong and selfless man Vic was. I hope that one day we will meet again, if only in remembrance, and we can talk about everything that has happened since then. Sometimes I look up to the stars and imagine him watching from where he is now. And I hope that someday we will see each other again to share our stories.